Good afternoon, everybody. This is the History Buff, and today we're going to be looking at Cunk on Britain. If you've never heard of Cunk, I forget her first name, Philomena, I think it is. She is hilarious. She plays a person who is um, it has a documentary, and she interviews historians. Now she's in on it. She's clearly an actress and a hilarious actress at that. She is able to play an excellent character, and she ends up talking to a lot of historians. And this just came to my attention a little while ago, and let's get into it. If you check it out, I think let me know your thoughts in the comments about her. She's wonderful. You can find it on Netflix right now, and I'll put a link in the description for the video we're watching.
1914, Britain suffered the first of many 20th century shocks.
Nowadays, first world is something you put in front of the word problem to show that it isn't really that bad, like running out of couscous or not being able to check Twitter in a tunnel. But back then, first world was what they called the war. The First World War.
The First World was what they called the war. That's interesting.
Had loads of nicknames. The war to end all wars, the Great War, and of course, World War One.
Why did they call World War One World War One?
That's an excellent, dumb question to say with a straight face.
It's quite pessimistic numbering, isn't it? Or did they just know it was the start of a franchise?
At the time, they weren't numbering the wars, although I think that in the First World War, the idea of it being a great war, denoting the sheer scale of the conflict, the casualty rate, was already becoming used quite a lot.
So it was called the Great War, but not because it was great.
Okay, that is now you may get the point of where she's going with this. To be honest with you, my wife, who is not very much into history, will sit down and watch this with me on Netflix. This is just a fabulous gem. World War One was the start of a franchise. That's interesting. Straight, and the reaction is wonderful already from the historian.
The First World War was started by the killing of one man, Franz Ferdinand. You've probably never heard of him, or the band named after him, but he was dead important, by which I mean he was only important when he was dead. His assassination triggered a series of other killings. Soon it caught on, and everyone wanted to be killed. It was a bigger craze than fidget spinners.
Eventually, Britain got sucked into the
Oh my
fighting,
God.
and men queued up to have their flat caps converted into fighting men's helmets. Soon, hundreds of thousands of Tommies were heading for battle.
Why were all the British soldiers in World War One called Tommy? Was that just a coincidence?
No, it wasn't a coincidence, it's just a general name that became applied to British soldiers in the same way we talk of Fritz as being a generic name for German soldiers.
What happened in Norman's land? Were only people that were called Norman allowed in there?
Well, it's not
No
no
man's
man's land. This is no man's land. And the idea being that this is particularly dangerous territory between the lines of the Germans on one side and the British on the other. This is essentially just a killing zone, a very dangerous zone in between trench systems.
Why did they fire shells at each other? Because shells wouldn't really hurt, would they? Unless they were those razor clam shells, because they're quite sharp, aren't they?
Well, these weren't seashells, these were heavy pieces of ordnance. We're actually talking about bits of metal in brass casing, so that's where the name shells comes from.
All right.
Oh my gosh. To be able to say that with a straight face, ask those questions, that's crazy. But at the same point, it's also kind of genius, because as a historian, we tend to be dry, and documentaries are made this way. Two people sitting in a chair, having a serious discussion about what happened. One person asks the question, and they already probably know the answer, and then the historian gives the answer in greater context and more specifics on it, and then they show some footage and they move on, or they're walking outside and they walk on. And this is a very interesting way of asking these questions and keeping other people other than historians involved. I think it's great.
Looking at footage from the time, it's hard to get a grip on just how brutal it must have been for Tommy and Norman, because it's in black and white and everyone's moving too fast, probably to avoid the shells. Even though it looks a bit like Charlie Chaplin, it's actually not funny at all.
So, I'm talking about Charlie Chaplin. Okay, some don't think he's funny. All right, that's fair. I love that they move really quick because they didn't have the frame rate. I think that's probably what it was, down. But that's why you see a lot of World War I videos, moving rather quickly. Unless I'm wrong on that, but I do believe it was because of frame rate. You can let me know in the comments if I'm correct or not, but I believe that's it.
So you can't laugh, just like with Charlie Chaplin.
What's with
One man who vividly captured the sheer horror of War I was the poet Wilfred Owen.
If, in some smothering dreams, you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues.
You get the gist.
My friend.
As if the
Love it. That was such a perfect documentary thing to do, and it goes on. She's just like, you get the drift.
killing wasn't bad enough. The accommodation was scarcely worth 2 stars on TripAdvisor. Soldiers had to live in trenches, snaking cramped corridors of filth and squalor, without so much as a patio.
The World War I trenches weren't the right place for conventional warfare, were they? But why did neither side think about mud wrestling? Because they're the perfect conditions, aren't they?
Well, I mean, trench warfare wasn't new. I think that whilst you will get the occasional game of Christmas football, I don't think that anyone actually ever thought that letting the guns fall silent and having mud wrestling competitions was ever going to sort anything out.
I think they missed a trick, don't you?
Eventually the war ended at 11 o'clock on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in the year 1119, 1118, hence the term stopping for 11s. The soldiers came home to a Britain they could hardly recognise because it was wearing a skirt. While the Tommies had been away at the front, women had stepped into their old jobs. There were women milkmen, women postmen, women bus driver men, even women male prostitutes.
Okay, it's very true after almost every major war, or lots of high casualty wars, such as World War I, World War II. A lot of women did fill the positions in the workforce for the men, and a lot of positions, not just necessarily the workforce, but that is so coming home to Britain wearing a skirt, and women male prostitutes. It's really weird.
What's more, the economy was in a pickle. After the war, many industries found it almost impossible to sell their goods abroad, because abroad was mainly rubble. There were strikes and marches and a Great Depression. Things were shithouse bad.
People needed escapism, but luckily for them, the age of mass entertainment was just beginning. It was the Roaring '20s. City streets were full of jazz clubs, packed with Jeeveses and Worcesters, and women with Lego haircuts dancing like they were surprise balls shitting their pants at a fancy dress party. And people who couldn't afford to enjoy a Roaring '20s for themselves could still watch films of other people doing it at the newly invented cinema.
The cinema was a cross between YouTube and theatre.
Oh my god, I never thought of it like that. That's perfect. The cinema was a cross between YouTube and the theater. That is perfect. That's exactly it. And oh my god, that's hilarious.
Despite this, it was popular and people queued to get in. They showed Charlie Chaplin films, but even that couldn't keep them away. The whole country went films bonkers. Going to the cinema in those days was more like going to a book, because there was no sound. The story was explained by words on the screen. A bit like spoilers, but happening at the same time as you were watching it, so not as annoying.
And if you couldn't make it to a cinema or cocktail bar, you could still enjoy the jazz age, because scientists had worked out a way to force jazz into your house using a magic called radio.
Radio was an exciting new invention that made it possible to hear other people's voices in your living room without the use of thin walls or a devastating mental condition.
Devastating mental condition. She actually hits on a very, or the producers, I guess, actually hit on a very important thing. There was not much going on before World War One in terms of entertainment. It had not come a long way, but after World War One, you are talking, cinemas that do show up, and this is very different. This is how people begin to get their news. This is a very new form of entertainment, and to a certain extent, quite affordable. So there's that, and then the radio was the biggest thing, because you could get a radio in your household. It would become more and more affordable, and you would listen to shows from your home, and that was a very new concept. But I don't know what she has against Charlie Chaplin, really.
To help keep the early airwaves in check, the government created something called the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC. How come the BBC started with radio? Because radio's loads less popular than television, isn't it?
There are people in radio who'd get very angry about that. Radio still performs tremendously well.
There's still radio.
There is still radio. At the time the BBC was set up, there wasn't a choice because there was no TV.
Luckily, a man called John Logie Baird was about to give birth to television. Not literally out of his vagina, but metaphorically out of his shed. After doing some weird experiments like something out of Wallace and Gromit, Baird's TV was finalised, although idiotically, he'd gone to the trouble of inventing it without checking whether there were any programmes on yet. It took a while before there was anything worth putting your iPhone down for. The earliest transmissions looked like Abraham Lincoln looming through a glass door and weren't very exciting. Luckily, it was a short step from there to the BBC's first Saturday night extravaganza, TV's opening night ceremony.
Vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
A mighty maze of mystic magic rays.
The show got a record audience of 400, the sort of viewing figures BBC Four still dreams of.
What a shot against the BBC. That's very funny. Okay, that's very true. And another thing to note is that before, well, I would say after World War One, people these days, if you're in America or you're from the American point of view, you're not thinking of Britain as this giant, country, or a lot of people. There was a huge colonial empire. So them creating the BBC and putting it on the air as a particular show or 24/7 kind of deal, although I don't think it was that. I think it was rather short. That was a big deal. Yeah, interesting stuff there. Real history. But putting down your iPhone for it, I love it. She does the cross. What do you call it? The cross chronological jokes.
Despite its popularity, the BBC was causing controversy from the start, and the powers that be were suspicious of it.
Why did the government start the BBC in the first place? It seems like these days they're always trying to close it down. Was it one of those stupid mistakes they made, like Brexit?
The government didn't...
Like Brexit. Oh my God. Oh man.
...strictly start the BBC. The BBC was originally a private company in 1922. It employed a rather fierce Scottish guy called John Reith. And people still talk about Reithian values and Reithian broadcasting. Reithian values were to inform, educate, and entertain.
Well, all at the same time?
Yeah.
Since those early days of black and white tat, the BBC has grown throughout the years to become one of the biggest programme shitting machines in the world.
I did not know. I actually did not know it was private to begin with. I thought it was all government, and it's something I learned.
Making groundbreaking, iconic programmes which still try to inform, educate or entertain.
So the BBC is supposed to inform, educate or entertain?
And entertain.
I'm going to list some BBC things and I want you to say whether they inform, educate or entertain. Okay. News at 10.
Inform.
Open University.
Educate.
Doctor Who.
Entertain.
Strictly Come Dancing.
Entertain.
Holmes Under the Hammer.
Entertain.
Inspector Phillips.
What is Inspector Phillips?
Oh, I made that one up. That was just a trick question.
Okay, well, it didn't work.
Sounds real though, doesn't it? Inspector Phillips.
No, I instantly knew that it wasn't a real one.
Eat Well for Less. It's where Greg Wallace and another man see how much a family spend on a week's shopping and then criticise them. Make them eat porridge from Lidl.
Educate?
Inform.
Oh, inform. Okay.
Well done. Sorry, I wasn't totting up the scores.
Thank you.
But this golden future of television would have to wait, because back in 1939 times, the TV signals were suddenly switched off because someone decided to start another war to end all wars.
Another one.
When he became leader of Germany, Adolf Hitler was a funny-looking character with silly hair, a bit like Boris Johnson. But he turned out to be a hateful maniac who would let nothing get in the way of his ambition, a bit like Boris Johnson.
Poor Boris Johnson. Well, I mean, he can take it, but okay. That's so true about him.
Hitler believed the Germans were an elite race, like the Grand Prix.
He also thought he owned Poland, and when he went round there to get it back, Britain cried war.
This country is at war with Germany.
Luckily, Britain had a hero on its side, a man whose name will never be forgotten, Winston Churchill.
I'm sorry, that is just great. This is.
Churchill's speeches were stirring and powerfully erotic.
We know it will be hard. We expect it will be long.
He was one of the greatest orators of all
I'm sorry. Poor Winston Churchill, that's terrible. But very, very funny.
time. And some of the phrases he used still resonate today, such as finest hour, never surrender, and of course, we shall fight them bitches.
And we needed Churchill's stirring mumbling, because at first the war didn't go well. Within 6 months...
Yeah, and you know what? I always felt for Winston Churchill. I mean, he had a sort of a checkered past, you know, especially when it came to World War I and Gallipoli, and he wasn't really he was sort of like the outsider that became prime minister. It was like the day of or the day after. I think it was the day of the invasion of France and the Low Countries that Neville Chamberlain stepped down and he stepped up, and so immediately he was thrust onto a huge amount of responsibility, and the war beginning, the Sitzkrieg as it was called, ended, and the Blitzkrieg began, and he had to deal with that immediately, like day one.
France was occupied by the Nazis, who they didn't see coming because they'd been expecting the Germans. Hitler wanted to make Britain...
It is so important to remember that there are two different kinds of people. There are, well, not kinds of people, but there are the Germans, and then there are the Nazi Germans. I think it was like a third of the Germans were Nazis. As a matter of fact, I'm listening to a podcast on it right now. And it's not like they were necessarily fanatical Nazis, even the people that were in the party. But people... I think I mentioned it in one of the last episodes I did. You know, the Nazis were not the ones that invaded. The Germans were the ones that invaded. The Nazi was the ideology.
In German to match its royal family, but the RAF held Hitler's
match
forces
its
back
royal
in amazing...
family. Yeah, the royal family was, I think, more German than anything. Anyway, it's just funny comment about the royal family.
Dogfights in the sky that were done by aeroplanes, not actual flying dogs, which sadly science still hasn't invented yet. This was the Battle of Britain.
It seems amazing that these young men could fly and fight so well. Although when you look, you'll see the planes had tiny targets and crosses drawn on the side, which made them easier to hit.
But planes weren't only used in dogfights. The Germans changed tactics. Instead of attacking planes, which could move out the way, they attacked the ground, which couldn't, in something called the Blitz.
Preceded by a shower of flares, German bombers rained fire and high-explosive bombs in their most savage attack on London.
Hitler's pilots started dropping bombs. Sort of aeroplane poos, and people had to hide from them. They built big
Airplane poos? That's okay. A bomb is an airplane poo. That's interesting.
tin shelters in
Okay.
their gardens,
A bomb is
or
an
ran down the
airplane poo.
nearest tube
That's
station
interesting.
without a ticket or a valid Oyster card. Countless houses were reduced to big piles of bricks and wood, which is
I think an Oyster card is the modern day ticket. You know, like
think an
it's
Oyster
the
card,
thing that you load it up on.
is the modern day ticket,
and
you know, like
sort
it's
of what
the thing
houses
that you
are
load the money
anyway,
on.
but in a different order.
in,
Despite this, thanks to the plucky
load the
British
money on.
spirit, people weren't totally down in the dumps, even if they lived in one. People sang songs during World War II to keep their spirits up, didn't they? How loud did they have to sing to be heard over the bombs?
Well, especially as they would have sometimes been in underground stations, sheltering from the bombs. It would have been loud in the underground station, the singing, if everybody was singing together. But it's true, you wouldn't have been heard much.
I wonder if when they sang, they used to time their singing with the explosions. That would be a fun thing to do.
It would be difficult. It'd be very difficult to time it. It's quite random, the falling of bombs.
In the war, there were lots of songs taking the piss out of Hitler, weren't there? How come they don't sing those sorts of songs anymore?
Well, he's not around anymore, so it's not so amusing.
Where is he?
Well, he's dead.
He's dead.
Yes.
Oh, right, so it'd be disrespectful to
Well, not
speak
so much
ill of him.
disrespectful as pointless, really.
Pointless.
A bit pointless.
Yeah. A lot of singing was needed, because even when the Blitz ended, the war was far from over. There were many huge battles to come, most of which will never be forgotten, because they've since been converted into blockbuster movies. How was
Oh my God! Because they've since become converted into blockbuster
Oh my
movies.
God! Because they've since
Oh my
become
God! That's why they're not.
converted into
That's very
blockbuster
true.
movies.
It's extremely
Oh
true.
my God! That's why they're not. That's very true.
Wow.
It's
I mean, if you think
extremely
about
true.
stuff like that, I mean, one of the resurgences
Wow.
of the
I
American
mean, if you think
Civil
about
War
stuff
was
like
the
that, I mean,
movie Gettysburg.
one of the resurgences of the American Civil
There
War
were a
was
lot
the
of great. I
movie
mean, look at Saving
Gettysburg.
Private Ryan. That sort of
I mean, there
opened the
were a
door
lot of
again to
great-
you know
look at
World War
Saving
II
Private
history.
Ryan, that sort of opened the door again
along
to,
with Band
World
of
War
Brothers
II
and things
history.
like that. There were a lot of movies
along
in
with
the
Band of Brothers, and
60s
things
and
like that.
70s about
There were
World War
a
II.
lot
It's
of
really
movies in the
it's the
60s
war
and
that
70s
happened.
about World War II. It's really
Just
it's the
before,
war that
essentially, really
happened
before huge breaks in movies.
just
I mean, there were big ones
before,
World War II.
essentially, really before
But
huge breaks in
after the
movies. I mean,
war,
there
they
were big ones
made
before World War II
movies.
but
I think
after the war, they
just
made
but before the end of the war,
movies.
they
I
made a
think
movie
that,
about Guadalcanal. I
just
can't remember what it's
before,
called.
but before the end of the war, I
all
think
the
they
way
made
up
a movie about
there.
Guadalcanal. I
It's
can't
a
remember what it's
great
called.
topic for
But
a
all the way
movie
up
and
there,
to show heroics.
it's a great
and,
topic for a
well, to be
a
fair,
movie
to
and
change
to show heroics
narratives
and
to a certain extent.
well, to be fair, to change
or to show
narratives
sort of
to a
one-sided
certain extent,
things on
or to show sort of
you know on
one-sided
topics because there's
things
multiple
on-
sides.
on-
And that's as a historian,
you
wanna
know, on topics
make sure you
because
get
there's
as much
there's
information
multiple
as
sides,
possible.
and that's
but,
as a historian you want to
there are a
make
lot
sure
of
you get
things
as
that
much
are
information
assumed
as
with
possible,
movies,
but
even
there are a
documentary
lot of
movies.
things that are assumed.
it? We
with
beat the
movies,
Germans at
even
Dunkirk in War
documentary
II,
movies.
but still didn't win the whole war.
Well, first of all, I think we've got to stop calling it War II. I mean, it's the Second World War if you're American, and you have to have it this way, it's World War II. But
War One and War Two. It should actually be Battle
War
One
One
and
and
Battle
War
Two if
Two.
you're thinking about it.
It should actually be Battle
they
One
were
and Battle
essentially
Two
two
if you're
battles
thinking
of the
about
same
it.
war. If you're a historian, you
Because they
sort
were
of step
essentially
back and
two
look at
battles
it,
of
you
the
can-
same war.
you can
If
really
you
see it as
if you're a
that.
historian,
you know,
you
that's
sort of
that's
step
the language
back
we
and
tend
look
to
at it,
use.
you can-
But in terms of
you can really see
Dunkirk,
it
I think
as
that's
that.
the wrong way round. We actually lose at Dunkirk.
We lost at Dunkirk.
We lost at Dunkirk. I
I
mean,
don't
it's
think so. It turns out
Why would you challenge a historian when they say definitively, like, no,
Why
we
would
lost
you
that
challenge a
battle?
historian
We did.
when they
Yeah.
say
No, we didn't.
definitively, like,
Yes, we did.
no, we lost that battle?
I think so. You know,
we
that kind of
did.
thing.
Yeah.
That's
No, we didn't.
you
Yes, we
would
did.
never expect that from a regular
think so.
documentary.
Yeah, that
Dunkirk
kind of
was a
thing.
huge disaster.
You would
Like
never
most
expect that
sequels,
from a
War
regular
II was
documentary.
proving less fun than War One.
What made the war harder was that we didn't know what the Germans were planning, because they said it in a sort of code language known as German.
It took a team of British boffins using a magic typewriter called the Enigma machine literally loads of time to crack it, but crack it they did.
Hey, yeah, that's important. At what was it, Bletchley Park?
Hey,
think
yeah, that's
They
important.
made the first computer.
what was it, Bletchley
like,
Park?
oh, I can't remember his
I think
name. He's
they-
British.
They made the first computer
with a bunch of
like,
different-
oh, I can't remember his name. He's British.
They were like 5 or 6 of different. I can't remember his name, but he made this machine. 5 or 6 of them. I can't remember his name, which was basically a giant program. He made this machine. The first machine enabled them to run all the calculations to find out what the change of the enigma was, because they changed run all the calculations daily to find out what the change of the different was, because they changed number or letters that are on there. The different meant different things on a different day. Or letters that are so in order to decipher it, you had to run all the possibilities that it could be. And so unfortunately, when they first started out, the machine, and they didn't have a base. When they first started out, like what would they? The machine, what could it be for today? They didn't have a base. Submarines are going over. As to like what would they? It's going to be an attack. We're thinking about an attack here. And as it turned out, there's going to be an attack. We're thinking about an attack. No, and I think I'm right about this. And as it turned out, here you go again. I saw this one. No, and I think I'm right about this. What the key was that every time they ended a message, it entered. It ended in a every time they ended a message, it entered. And that was all they needed. Once they found that phrase at the end of pretty much every message, I think. Once they found they could start reading the pretty much every message. Now they knew they just had to find the ones that matched the German codes, and the rest of the machine could figure it out within seconds. So they were right on it as soon as the machine could figure it out within a message seconds. So they were right on it as soon as they caught a man's last name began with a T, and actually it was very sad. Man's last name began with a T, and it was actually very sad up until I think smart man, but 70s, Great Britain, something. It was illegal to be gay, and he 70s or he was gay. It was illegal to be gay, and he's a very unfortunate. He was gay. State of affairs, but he was quite the hero. Very unfortunate. To be honest, but just like if you're in the but he was quite the CIA, or to be honest, but just like you never get the CIA or recognition due to the classified. You never get the. Gosh, recognition due to if know it, put it right down there. Things, but in the comments. Gosh,
and with Germany's secrets twatted wide open, Britain and its allies were able to organise D-Day and invade France, but in a nice way. In grueling and exciting scenes like these, expertly depicted in the pulse-quickening video game Call of Duty 2, soldiers scrambled out of their boats, looking for power-ups and health kits, terrified every second that a Nazi bullet might kill them, forcing them to respawn several feet away and be delayed by a number of seconds.
Oh my god. Just if anyone is watching that did not happen. Oh my god. That is the game Call of Duty. I've never seen that put in documentary before. That is the game Call of Duty. I've never seen although I have to admit that that is probably the most modern that is aside from the most modern aside from aside from people who dress up the reenactors. Aside from that's not people who dress necessarily wrong in terms of the way it might have looked. That's not
the British won, and immediately there was widespread jubilation and people dancing about in black and white and getting off with people who were almost certainly dead now. A new, hopeful era had dawned, an era which 41 years later included the BBC painting and decorating television sitcom Brushstrokes.
All right, let's end it there. I think that's sort of World War I and World War II. All right, let's end it there. I think that's sort of World War I and World War II according to on Britain. Her name is Philomena. I'm glad somebody mentioned this. I did see this. I never thought. I'm glad somebody mentioned to look into it as a reaction. I did see this. I never thought to. Anyway, let me know what you think down below. Is this this is history humor? That would be the topic, I guess, which is kind of weird. This is history humor. That would be the topic, I guess, which is kind of weird. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you do like this. I'd appreciate it. Helping out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you do like this. I'd appreciate it. I would enjoy this. Send it the link below if you want to watch the video. I would enjoy this. In its own right. I'll put the link. And I would love it if you would comment, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for new notifications. And I would love it if you would comment, like. And if I got anything wrong, please correct me. All I ask is that you do it. And if I got anything wrong, please correct me. Like a constructive manner. Which all we can ask for. Thank you so much. Have a great time. I'll see you on the next reaction episode. All we can ask for.